and welcome back to the Talk, Listen, Collaborate podcast. This is the first episode of our three-part series, Throughlines, Navigating EdTech's Past, Present, and Future, where we will explore some of the hottest educational trends of today by looking backwards through history. We will see what developments of the past can teach us about where EdTech is headed, and we will ask where these trends came from and whether things are truly changing or if we are applying new tools to common goals. I'm Julie Spear, and I have two TLC teammates here with me. Erin, Quincy, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us, Julie.
It's good to be here. Julie, what tech trend are we going to talk about here today?
I wanted to tell you about personalized learning. I chose this because conceptually, I absolutely love it. I think it's the goal of every teacher to be able to provide each learner with experiences that help them accomplish their personal goals in a way that's uniquely tailored to them. But practically speaking, this can be hard to do in a class of really any size. So I wanted to explore this idea and trace personalized learning a little bit through history to see what we can learn from the past about the future of this trend. Before we dive in, Erin and Quincy, what words come to mind when you hear the term personalized learning?
I think of really individualized learning that's really focused. So one-on-one learning where there's a student and a teacher.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. Quincy, what about you?
I've been around this term for a long time, as long as I can remember being in education. I've never fully understood what personalized learning is. What Erin said, I think, captures it for me. I've just gone along with the idea and tried to think about it in terms of motivating and being relevant in the information that I deliver.
Oh, I like those ideas. And so sort of it's a buzzword, but we sometimes don't always know exactly what it means, maybe?
Yeah.
Well, in a 2013 report entitled A Step-by-Step Guide to Personalized Learning, the authors Bray and McClaskey identified personalized learning as being, quote, paced to learning needs, tailored to learning preferences, and tailored to the specific interests of different learners. So based on this, it's really, I think, no surprise why this is popular, not only in higher ed, but also in K through 12, right? Personalized learning has the opportunity to improve retention and engagement and motivation, to build independent, lifelong learners and foster a growth mindset. And for these reasons and others, personalized learning has gotten a lot of traction. For context on the scope here, there are over 1.2 million articles on Google Scholar with the keywords personalized learning and health science education. And a quick Google search will show you not only articles and blogs about the term, but also products. And I want us to kind of remember that personalized learning is a market. The 2024 market for personalized learning products is estimated to be at least $2 billion. That's billion with a B. I'm seeing some wide-eyed faces. Did you expect that number to be so high?
I didn't. Educational technology, it would be the first place I go where money is being spent. I wouldn't even imagine $1 billion spent in ed tech. So that's why I'm a little surprised by that number. That's awesome.
Yeah, 2 billion in 2024, and it's expected to grow to over 8 billion by 2029. To get a further sense of scope, I traced the trend backwards as well. I used a Google tool called Ngram to search for the terms personalized learning, adaptive learning, and individualized instruction in books published between 1500 and 2019 to get a little bit of a preliminary sense of when this trend may have come into vogue. So let me put this graph up, and Erin, would you describe these trends for us?
So I'm seeing a graph here where we're really not seeing any instances of personalized learning, adaptive learning, or individualized instruction until post-1900. So this is definitely a 20th century phenomenon. Individualized instruction is definitely the phrase that has the most hits from books in this time period. However, we're definitely seeing a trend in the 21st century, so after the year 2000, where personalized learning is definitely on an upswing.
Yeah, it kind of grew exponentially here later than the other terms possibly, but really kind of maybe starting around 1950 and having that exponential growth towards where we are now in time. Absolutely.
To me, what jumps out is it follows the similar technology wave. I would say the internet might have had
Yeah.
the development of the internet might be synonymous with this idea. Is it, correlation, cause and effect? I don't know what the relationship is, but I would say that technology, this is a great example of where maybe technology affords something that didn't exist before, or at least it became stickier, for lack of a better term, another buzzword. But sticky learning is infused with technology in some new ways, and specific technology, right? Because we used to think the chalkboard was revolutionary technology. The pencil was a big deal when that was invented. But now we have the internet, the interconnectivity between computers, and the access to information in a certain way might also have fueled that individualized learning, personalized learning experience. So yeah, I'm surprised, but at the same time, not shocked to see that trend.
Yeah, awesome. Well, keep that in mind. Maybe some of the story is going to align with those ideas that you just shared. So after I looked at these graphs myself, originally, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole about early education in the United States. And to summarize several hundred years, as the educational system evolved to serve not only the rich students who could afford private education, there was really a pressing need to scale the education system affordably and in a way that provided quality education and supported all learners. Looking across the years since then, I could tell you all about how technologies ranging from the blackboard to mixed reality can all be tied back to personalized learning. But I want to focus on one particular vignette that really blew my mind because it's not something I had heard of before. To set the stage, here's a quote, and I want you to guess when this was written and what technology is being described, okay? John Blythe wrote about a quote, device for presenting to a student a succession of instructional items requiring a discriminative response and providing the student with an immediate check on the accuracy of his response. Aaron, when do you think that was written and what might it be describing?
So just thinking back to the graph that we just looked at, I think it's probably post 1900, but maybe between 1900 and 1950.
Okay, and what do you think this technology, piece of technology, or this tool looks like?
Well, the first thing that came to mind was a typewriter, but then as you kept talking, there was an indication that a student would get information back. And of course, as we know, you're only inputting information into a typewriter, it doesn't give it back to you. So I'm kind of stumped in that area. I'm very interested to hear what it is.
Well, you're not far off, Aaron. The quote is from 1960, and the author here is discussing a tool called a teaching machine. Many people credit the first teaching machines to the Harvard psychology professor B.F. Skinner. In 1950, he developed a tool to help students in his daughter's fourth grade class learn and practice math questions. Yeah, so this is B.F. Skinner, by the way, right? The father of behaviorism. He printed problems on a card, and students could place the card into a machine and use levers to compile a two-digit answer. And if the answer was right, a light appeared, and he subsequently made other versions, including one that replaced the light with a bell.
This is like Maslow's Pavlov's dog. What are we talking about? I'm tracking with you, but yeah, I'm starting to get nervous about where this is going. This is cool. I did not know this.
Yeah, right? I mean, who doesn't love a dinging bell when they get math questions, right?
It could be
So,
dinner time, or I got the math problem correct. One of the two.
yeah, who knows which? So, he actually wasn't the first person to build a machine like this. Sidney Pressey developed a similar tool over 30 years earlier. In his early life, Pressey was often bored at school and felt he either already knew the content or could get through it faster than was being presented. And I think that this undoubtedly fueled his interest and his then career in instructional technology and learning science at The Ohio State University. At this time in history, there was a lot of interest in intelligence testing, which today we know was often problematic and biased. And he and his wife, Luella Cole, sold millions of copies of standardized tests to schools. Then between 1915 and 1920, he began to develop a machine using, Aaron, typewriter parts that could automatically score the tests in a way that we can kind of think of as a precursor to modern standardized testing tools like Scantrons. Remember those?
That's fascinating to see how that's throughput through time, developed over time. So now we have Scantrons. We love Scantrons, right?
Sure did.
Mm.
Maybe they're obsolete now, but they definitely made a big mark on the testing scene. Based on this, Pressey built another machine that he called an automatic teacher. It had different modes that could provide drill and practice opportunities for students in his classes. Let me show you a picture, and Quincy, maybe you can describe it for us.
This looks like a Singer typewriter slash ticker tape, something you might see early version on the stock market, the stock exchange. But yeah, really cool apparatus, very heavy. It looks like it might be heavy. Students maybe approach it. Hopefully, it's mounted somewhere and that they don't have to lug it around like our lovely laptops these days. This would be a little bit different than a laptop, but that's crazy to me.
Yeah, you definitely get your weightlifting in carrying this around
Right.
class to class.
I'm just like the candy reward tube. I got to hear more about that.
This machine presented a question and several possible answers to the learners. The student would press a key. So Quincy, you kind of talked about those levers and those kind of functions. The students would press a key corresponding to the answer they thought was correct. If the machine was in teach mode, students could not progress to the next question until they selected the right answer. But when the other mode was activated, a dial could be set to a number, and after students answered that number of questions correctly in a row, a piece of candy would be dispensed.
You're joking.
Nope.
I
So
th I
what?
thought you were joking.
No, I'm not joking.
And why don't we have these now? That's all I want to know. Because
Well,
I need
instead we have
candy.
the laptop.
But mine doesn't. It has coffee spilled all over it, but it does not have candy when I send an email, a positive email. That's what I need. That's awesome.
So if you had this machine, what candy would you want dispensed?
Oh, M&Ms. That seems convenient. And yeah, Skittles. Skittles are good M&Ms, depending on my mood, right?
Aaron, what about you?
I'm not much for candy, but I really do love a chocolate bar. So maybe if it was just dispensing pieces of a chocolate bar, that would be my choice.
What I want to know is what does it dispense if you get the wrong answer?
Broccoli.
Oh my gosh.
So, broccoli aside, based on these descriptions, I think we can see why history has conflated Skinner and Pressey's devices. They had a lot of similarities. For example, would you agree that these both leverage what we would now call the testing effect?
So it actually makes me think about spaced repetition and how you could use a machine like this to make sure that someone could, over the period of a few days or something like that, be reminded of what they had learned in a controlled manner.
And that just brings me to the immediate feedback, right? We all know how important that is, acquiring new knowledge, right? Especially you think about anatomy, right? We need feedback. Yep, you got it right. You're on the right track. Keep going. So besides the candy and broccoli, but the space practice of it all, I think is a huge value that we model today, right? We model today. We model in the TLC courses that quick response, keeping people engaged, keeping them moving in the right direction. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything you guys have said is spot on. Interestingly, I think that the two inventors here would argue that the devices were distinct. And I'm curious what you think. Pressey's automatic teacher used multiple choice questions, while Skinner believed that his machine allowed students to construct answers because they had to compile mathematical responses. And I don't know about you guys, I find this a bit ironic because Skinner seems to be in part presenting his machine as a tool for constructivism, but he's often regarded as the father of American behaviorism. And after all, Skinner's machine lit up and rang a bell when students answered correctly, which Quincy, as you shared with us before, feels a little bit Pavlovian and just as Pavlovian as dispensing candy. So I'm curious what you make of these two distinctions here.
Yeah, uh, I find it a little ironic. I don't know if I make the distinction, but I have 80 years, 60 years of think time here. It's been a long time since these things have been invented, but I don't know. I think they're very similar. I think the I think about the difference in terms of intention, very different, function, the same, right? There's some fascinating mattresses out there that, they say the best night's sleep, and they're made out of, polyurethane from outer space, and they're a certain color, and they regulate. Cool. Can I can I get a good night's rest? Then do I feel sore in the morning? It's all the same function wise.
And for legal reasons, we're not endorsed by any of those mattress companies.
Love that.
Well, so at any rate, Pressie's automatic teacher was met with mixed reactions. Many were excited, but in her book titled Teaching Machines, Audrey Waters wrote of Pressie that, quote, he recognized that some sentimentalists would resist education by machine, but he insisted that machines would actually free the teacher from the mechanical tasks of her profession, the burden of paperwork and routine drill, so that she may be a real teacher, not a largely clerical worker. Does that remind anyone of any conversations you've
Wow.
been hearing recently?
I think about intelligent tutoring systems that are born out of this is offloading the human aspect of the instruction. Hey, okay, I taught you this. This is why you need to know it. Now go do it. And now there's a robot in the corner. But what do you all think about this idea of like the flipped classroom model, and how this might be some of the early beginnings of like the clerical, removing the clerical part, putting that elsewhere, right? So it kind of inverts that model. This might be the first version. What, some people say the flipped classroom model was invented at West Point in the 1980s by a professor that taught psychology. Could this have really been the origin story of that? What do y'all think?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think initially hearing the quote, my mind immediately went to the conversations about AI. But I love what you're sharing here, this idea of the flipped classroom, which is kind of offloading that lecture component, right, for students to do before they come to class, and then using that class time for a lot of scaffolded practice opportunities. So I can definitely see that through line between this quote and maybe the beginnings of flipped classrooms. So actually, not only were educators themselves skeptical, but students of the time were too. And let me read briefly from Waters' book again. Quote, a student-run publication, the Ohio State University Monthly, also covered Pressie's invention, although with a much wryer tone, quipping that if someone could just invent another machine that would punch the right answers into Pressie's teaching machine, the future of education would be, quote, perfect in the eyes of the student. The article criticized a university culture that had become so focused on test taking and on cheating. Test taking wasn't just a drudgery for teachers, it was a drudgery for students too, end quote.
So this makes me think back to when I was in school, and it just seemed like all the time we had standardized tests. Now, I know that's not actually the truth. There was plenty of other things going on in classrooms, but I remember each year we had maybe 3 days, 3 whole days of standardized tests, and how nobody really looked forward to that. And I also didn't look forward to regular tests in school. So I do see why there would be so much criticism around a culture that's really focused on testing. I think that sometimes you test just to test when there's a lot of other things that are happening in the learning process.
Yeah, I go to a lot of places when thinking about this stuff, but like teaching to the test, I know that that's something that has also been at the forefront of education. First we thought we should do it all the time, and then we thought you shouldn't do it. We shouldn't just teach to the test because a lot of stuff gets left out that is valuable. But now we're back to the idea that we should teach to the test because our learning objectives are aligned to the test, right? So I think that's where my mind goes.
Absolutely. So let me kind of summarize the end of Pressie's story here. Pressey's device was met with some pretty big roadblocks when he tried to bring it into the mass market. Although Pressey received several patents for his technology and even partnered with companies to produce his device, they experienced a series of manufacturing defects. And ultimately, in the wake of the Great Depression, people really weren't able to afford these devices. In the end, only about 127 devices were sold before production ended. So, a little bit of a sad ending there. After Pressey's device, a few others did come along, but Skinner ushered in a renewed interest amongst educational technologists for program teaching. This was in large part based on the context of the time. The launch of Sputnik led to a major concern that the educational system in the United States was falling behind, and this in turn sparked a renewed interest in the role of technology to increase educational outcomes. By 1962, as many as 200 companies were producing or planning to produce teaching machines. And while some did make it into use, they never really took over classrooms the way that Pressey, Skinner, and their contemporaries imagined. Criticisms of the technology coincided with the rise of the next major learning theory, cognitivism, and then the entrance of personal computers in the 1980s. So I was floored reading about this history because I think the skepticism about the teaching machines really reverberates around edtech today. For example, many 20th century educators were resistant to using the teaching machines out of fear of being replaced by the tool, but others were also hesitant because they didn't know how to integrate the tools into their lesson plans.
That's exactly what we're hearing about AI today. And I've heard some people who are extremely concerned that they will lose their jobs in education, specifically because of AI. And
Absolutely.
I'll go on the record saying that I think we're still going to have teachers and classrooms in the future, regardless of what comes of AI. I don't think it's going to mean that we don't have the traditional teachers providing information for students.
Julie, this is a brilliant story. I'm learning a lot here. If I may ask you a return question, turns out that it didn't catch on fire the way that I anticipated hearing this story here with our listeners for the first time in its totality. Why do you suppose that it didn't take off necessarily? Do you think it was that the attempt was to personalize learning and it just came short? Or was there other mitigating factors you think that contributed to this not taking off?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Pressey might argue that it was just the manufacturing defects, and if they had gone brilliantly, that we would all be using the machines. But I think that these machines emphasize a component of good teaching, right? In really reading about the teaching machines, I saw the ghosts of these typewriter-like tools in the technologies and methods that at the TLC we talk about all the time, like chunking information, using formative assessment, and giving frequent feedback. But there's also other components that are important. This doesn't address how you deliver content. It doesn't actually address how you build rapport with your students or build community in your classroom. And I think this touches on an aspect of good teaching, but isn't the entirety of good teaching.
You're making a lot of sense in real time here for me, Julie, with that answer, is that it didn't maybe make the full loop on this. And you, to me, this is depersonalized learning, perhaps, is what it was up against, right? So do you suppose, Aaron or Julie, do you suppose that there's an environment, a context, a profession, a content area that this might have had a better success rate?
I could see this being really valuable for lots of different content and disciplines, but really focusing on lower ordered skills. So those lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy. For example, you could put a card into Pressey or Skinner's device that has questions about pharmacology, about anatomy, about any discipline, but you're only ever, I think, going to target the skills like being able to identify, be able to recognize the lower ordered skills versus those higher skills like evaluating, appraising, creating. And so that might be also where this device can be a tool, but isn't going to cover all of the intricacies of teaching in real world classrooms.
I also think there's something to be said for the other domains of learning. There's the affective domain and the psychomotor domain. I don't think the machines would be as applicable for either of those domains, much like the higher ordered skills for cognitive. I also wanted to add that I think there's something to be said for the human dimension in teaching, that when you have a machine, that could be one aspect of it, but I think that in the end, we often learn best because there's some sort of a connection between us and someone else. As a student being connected to their teacher, or a student being connected to another peer in class. So I think that the machine eliminates all of that, and that's kind of our nature, that we are social and we want to be around others when we're learning, and that we benefit so much from learning from others as well as from our teachers.
Erin, you totally read my mind there. I think, like you're describing, these are conversations we're having now with AI and chatbots, right? We're hearing concerns about that distancing, about concerns about educators being replaced, about plagiarism, about critical thinking, in a same way or similar way that people were expressing concerns in the 1920s with Pressey's machine and the 1950s with Skinner's. And I agree with you. I think that in some ways, chatbots can help with personalized learning. They can serve as a virtual tutor. They can help students get background information. They can reword content in a way that might resonate with students. They can get lots of practice questions or get recommendations. But I think that the teaching machine story really shows, just like you said, that people really crave those human interactions. We want to learn from experts. We want to have meaningful conversations with mentors and colleagues and peers. And I agree with you. I don't think that will be replaced anytime soon by the 21st century's version of teaching machines. So in conclusion, Erin and Quincy, what would you say are your personal takeaways from this story of Pressey and Skinner and the quest for personalized learning?
I think a takeaway here for me is that technology can really help with learning, but it's really never going to replace that human connection. That you want to have those two things working in tandem, collaborating together, that technology can enhance, but it's not going to replace.
Yeah, just what you said, Aaron, learning is inherently, innately social, right? It rarely ever, if ever, happens in isolation. To me, learning is personal. And when we think about how we can cultivate that for everyone, because it is happening at the individual level always, even though we're doing it together, I now have some new ways to think about that.
What you just said, Quincy, learning is personal, is definitely going to rattle around my head for a while. I think I can really see how the story of teaching machines isn't just about a boom then a bust in technology. But to me, it really reflects more about continual efforts to use available tools and resources to answer the ever elusive question of how do we actually personalize the learning experience in a real and scalable way. Despite being about 100 years past Pressey's introduction of his device, as David Dockerman wrote in an article published in MPJ Science of Learning in 2018, quote, personalized learning is still hard. So I know we could definitely talk about this for much, much longer, but we'll end here for today. And I really want to thank both of you so much for this great conversation, and the entire TLC team, including Brenda Jackson, for your support. Next up in the series, we have a story brought to us by Erin about the past, present, and future of micro-credentials and micro-credentialing. So be sure to check that out. And until next time, this is Julie, part of your friendly TLC team, saying bye for now.